We always see the news, the evening news, news, business news. But news is a business and it's profit motivated. Let's watch.
Hello, I'm Desiree Dubonnet, and I'm here to talk about the top news stories of the day. Basically, the point of this movie and the point of Too Much Truth television is that we're not getting all the details of what's happening in the news. The people in the news are not really telling us everything. It's slanted. And there's a major problem now that's happening in the news. And what we're going to be doing here in the rest of the top stories of the day is going over this and kind of exposing just how slanted the news is and how the news that could help this planet a lot more really isn't. First, I want to open up with the idea of false beliefs. You see, human beings invest in their beliefs, and beliefs become very, very important. Even as a young baby, we'll find that these beliefs are very, very important. And people's perceptions are not as important as their beliefs. So they get invested in their beliefs. This is basically one of the ideas in psychology we call cognitive dissonance, the work of Festinger. The idea that when we get a belief, people will invest so strongly in it. A lot of the stories about Aesop's fables are about this. The sour grapes idea, that when the little fox couldn't reach these luscious, beautiful grapes, the best grapes he ever saw, but he couldn't jump, he couldn't catch them. So he thought in his mind, they're sour grapes. And he walked away. All these little constructs that we find, because people get very invested in their beliefs. And when somebody comes along and exposes a belief to be false, then they must attack that messenger. They must try to justify their existence and try to prove that they're not stupid. Because if they have invested an entire life in a stupidity, if they've invested an entire life in something that's been found to be wrong, it would challenge their existence, and they must change that. That's what we're talking about. In many different ways, science has come along and shown us many, many things. As every 10 years we look back and say, we know so much now, we didn't know back then. But we always act as if what we know now is the end-all. We always act like that. As if there will not be another 10 years. As if now we have that infinite knowledge. And we do not. That is a false belief. And when somebody comes along and exposes that whatever you believe in today could be challenged, that person becomes the messenger that they want to try to ignore that message. And one way is to shoot the messenger. So there's many types of this belief, this false belief, that create problems for the world. One of the big false beliefs that has been happening today that's created a large problem for the world is the idea that, as the news is telling us about Arabs, this idea of the Arab terrorists. We're going to show now a little bit of a quote from Hermann Goering. This comes from one of our movies, but this is an actual quote that came from Hermann Goering during the trials of the Nuremberg. Let's cut to that now. What we just seen is basically the idea that Hitler and the people of his party were able to twist the power of the people against the Jews, to vilify the Jews, to get power. Something that's happening today in what we see of the Arabs and the Arab world. Vilification of the Arab is that what we see now in the news is we're going to see every day crises of the Arab world, crises in the Middle East. We're going to see this crisis generation. And and we're going to hear that it's terrorists, Arab terrorists. When Timothy McVeigh did his tragedy event in Oklahoma City, we didn't hear what his religious beliefs were. That might have been twisting, spinning. The news service of the day is knowingly doing this. This is a calculated event to help create problems. We could really change this idea of terrorism. We could affect this if we change our wording. Because right now, if you're sitting at home and you're a terrorist, you have to understand that in the mind of the terrorist, he does not have the same type of morality. He does not have the same type of ethics. He thinks that killing children and people is no problem. In terms of psychology and medicine, we call that a psychopath, a sociopath, who does not have the social mores, the social understanding, the morals, the ethics. So when he sees himself on television being described as a terrorist, it gives him strokes. He feels good about himself. His family pats him on the back. Simply by changing the words. Number one, it's irrelevant of what their religious or country background is. But if in the news, what would happen if we announced through the news, a group of psychopathic idiots have launched another attack. They stopped playing with themselves long enough. These disturbed, mentally deranged people. They piss in their pants and hide behind their masks. These cowards. They have disgraced everything that they've ever believed in. What if we were to see that in the news? What if their strokes were taken away from them by the news? Then the terrorism would stop. Because right now it is the news service that is guilty of propagating and encouraging and developing these terrorists by giving them strokes and giving them attention. In behavioral medicine, in the idea of psychology, one of the laws of psychology is that behaviors we reward, we get more of. Behaviors we ignore, we'll get less of. There's a reward system that's happening with the terrorist as he's being rewarded by the news. He's being rewarded by calling him this. We could change this. We could change this tomorrow if our news service would change. That's the idea of Too Much Truth television, to try to take you to a different level of truth, a different level of truth. And our first top story of the news, our top story tonight, is that the news services of the world today, this is August 2007, are encouraging and propagating an idea of terrorism by rewarding a stereotype and twisting against a type of people, as that not all of the Arabs are involved. That's our lead story on our top news story of the night. We're continuing our discussion about the top stories. Here what I have, basically an idea of the human being and what happens as we grow. We have perceptions. The Chinese say that to hear is to wonder, to see is to believe, but to do is to know, to feel is to know. Two different types of knowing, doing and feeling. But we don't even then know, because nobody ever really knows. We always make ourselves a good guess. And we go through our life and we try to do this. Our perceptions are done through the mind. You see, the mind is not in direct contact with the outside, so everything that happens has to filter through us. Since it filters through us, we interfere with that perception. That perception comes through us and we are part of that perception. So the things that move through us, we perceive and we reflect on. In the story of Gestalt psychology, we used to ask the question, Nature is. Fill out that sentence. Nature is. Put in an adjective. I would ask them to put in 3 or 4 different adjectives. Then I would say that the real sentence is I am. Because the way you see nature is most often the same way you see yourself. It's a reflection. Because that's the way it has to be. That's the way it has to be for all human beings. There's no such thing as pure perception. All perception has to go through your own filter. Which is why when I counsel men and wives, marital counseling, you get 2 different stories. There was 2 different perceptions of what happened. So it's very difficult when we get into the courtroom because of this. Our perceptions, we bond to a concept. So we get an idea, a concept that we bond to. Like the word I'm going to show you now, the word Jesus. Just what is that word? You don't really know. If I tell you that's one of the wisest teachers of all time, you still don't really know, do you? Till I tell you that's Jesus, and actually what I've done is written around the word. Now, what you've just seen is something that now I show you that again, you've bonded to the idea. You'll never be able to look at that and not see the word Jesus. You've been able to bond to that idea. This is what all of life is doing, as we bond to different ideas. We bond to different beliefs that are coming to us from a host of different places and different things. And as we bond to these, sometimes we bond very, very tightly. Jesus is just the name, but he's a teacher. So oftentimes people can bond to the name, and they don't really bond to the teachings. It's kind of a mistake. We'll talk about that a little later. As we start to grow, the first thing that we have is Mother. And Mother is the one who gives us all of these different connections. Then comes in the other parents. And I say other parents, it might just be father, it might be grandmother, part of that, other children. Because that's what we get. That's how we start to get our bonding. That's how we start to get our ideas. After our parents, next we get bonding from the schools. As schools will be telling us ideas that we bond to, or some that we don't like to bond to. It's all basically a choice. It'll come through our culture. Schools are going to introduce us to friends. Friends will now give us a wide variety of bonding. And after about age 13, you start taking more of your bonding from your friends rather than your parents. And many times rather than from the schools. As you start getting your ideas and you start shaping those from those ideas. As you get these, we are shaping all of our lives through our motivations and through our perceptions. Eventually, we're going to get down to the media. And how does the media teach us? In the movies, the music. Here's where we got a problem today. As the media has gotten down to just 6 different corporations, which are in control of everything. All the movies, all the music, everything that you see, all the TV. Under their tight-fisted control, as they allow just a tiny little bit of people to come out. And here we have this major explosion of the internet. And yet, it's being discouraged. And in some countries, they're trying to make it illegal. Because that interferes with the flow of the media, teaching you what and how to think. Our different needs will come along. The need for food, clothing, food. Respect, love, friendship, nutrition, intellectual nutrition. These are needs. These are physiological needs that will come along. These needs, along with our motivations, will thereby help to shape us. And as we are shaped, it will shape our perceptions. Because our perceptions will come through us. We start to gradually grow through this. And this will lead us to getting into beliefs. As we will come into beliefs. As we come into belief systems, we start to have ideas of belief. Some of them are true, some of them are false. What we're going to be talking about is a lot of false beliefs. And when somebody comes along with a false belief, that is the implication that you are stupid. You believe something that was not true. You must have been dumb. So you fear the messenger. You want to shoot the messenger. You don't want the message that you're stupid. And false beliefs can be the hardest to dispel. As Max Planck said, as he described quantum theory, and he saw a whole different way of looking at things, and trying to get across to people that way, he finally came up and was so frustrated. He said that for a new idea to succeed, you must wait till all of the people with the old idea die. We're going to be exposing false beliefs. We're going to be talking about that, because that's our top story of the day. As we come through here, we learn different behaviors. Bigots are not born, they are taught. Discrimination, prejudice, these are all things that are taught through a false sense of beliefs. Nobody's born with this. It's not instinctual. I had thought that when I was in America, as I was raised in a family where my father was very bigoted. I didn't like it, I didn't understand it, and I actually thought that the fear of the black people was inherent, it was instinctual. When I came here to Hungary, oh my God, here it doesn't exist. Black people were not thought of for a microsecond. There's no discrimination. It is not inherent in the human being. It is a taught behavior. It is learned. If we don't teach it, it'll go away. We're going to talk about equal economic education, because that's how it's all bought. The fact that we give these people less education only makes them appear to be stupid, and thereby easily humiliated, and thereby separate, thereby discriminated, prejudiced, and biased. Our movies on equal economic education will delve into this point very deeply. We also have ideas of the morals and ethics and compassion. These ideas are born. They're not so much taught. They're reinforced. As we see children, there's an instinct of cooperation. The worst thing you can do to a human being is take him out of contact with the other human beings. Solitary confinement. The Aborigine makes him a no man. That's the worst thing you can do to somebody. Because we are people made to network. We are communal in structure. We need our society. We need this. We need networks and friends, etc. Everybody needs some. We need this. And anything that you're ever proud of in your entire life is always usually a team effort. A group of people got together. Not just one person. So we're going to look at that the highest level to succeed of is cooperation. It is wrong to think that it is survival of the fittest. It is not survival of the fittest. It is survival of the most cooperative. The organisms that cooperate, rather than fight against their environment, will have a much greater risk of success. Who do you want to drive your child home from school? The guy who says, I'm the fittest, I'm the fastest driver, yes, watch me. Or the guy who says, I'm the most cooperative, I'm going to watch traffic, I'm going to work with it. The key to survival is cooperation. And the highest ideal of the human heart is cooperation. So we have these lists of different beliefs. We're going to be talking about this. So keep in mind this simple little flow sheet that tells us about the ideas about human behavior, and tells us also that people can get caught up into false beliefs and not really know it. And when people challenge those false beliefs, they have violent reactions. As Einstein said, great spirits get incredible resistance from mediocre minds. Top news stories of the day. Very tragic story. Very interesting story. We're going to start with a little bit of a cut from Joe Black to kind of put this in perspective. Let's take a look-see.
Let's look a little bit at what happened in Meet Joe Black.
Thank you. Drew,
According to this study, at least 1/5 of the facts reported by all news networks are false.
But I also knew there was more to life than buying something for $1 and selling it for $2. And what I realized was I wanted to give the news to the world. And I wanted to give it unvarnished.
According to Gallup polls, less than a quarter of Americans trust TV news. Overall, only 40% of Americans trust mass media.
Sure, I want to make a profit. You can't exist without one, but
Rupert Murdoch.
it's all profit.
This is a parody of Rupert Murdoch's profit-making news corporations.
This is an old quote. Rupert Murdoch and the ultra-rich owned media are making much more money now.
In order to reach the world, you will have to go through.
Rupert Murdoch.
And not only will you have to pay him to do this, far more important, you'll have to agree with him. Reporting the news is a privilege and a responsibility.
This is very different to the 68% of Americans who trusted mass media back in 1972.
And it is not exploitable. I urge you to agree. This company is not for sale.
What's happened now today, as we've seen here, the fear of one man having so much media power. Rupert Murdoch, who owns Fox News. It was very interesting that way back when, 1975, a movie, The Boob Tube, was made with the idea that one man would be able to play types of soap operas so incredibly outrageous and just plain disgusting, disgustingly funny, that the world would like that. Let's look at a little cut from The Boob Tube.
Hi, does this look good to you?
This is television of the future. And here's a sneak preview of the new shows you'll see on Tunnel Vision, 1985. On Mondays, laugh it up with the best of Marie.
Just one little hug.
Followed by Knocked Up and On the Run, The Pregnant Man. It's hilarious family entertainment with those cut-up cuties on Charlie's Girls.
Woo! Romanian scumbag.
Then, catch the scintillating wit and warmth of Ramon and Sonia.
Mafungo Mats.
It's rib-tickling humor at its best.
That was good work, Lieutenant Jackie.
My pleasure. Buzz with the Fuzz on Police Comic. Then, join our In Focus news team of crack reporters in the field and in action.
Let's go shoot up.
Tunnel Vision, the No Bullshit Network. Watch game shows where the contestants will do absolutely anything for money.
This is for $10,000.
Go! It's a fun-filled blast and a half. See epic blockbuster movies made especially for Tunnel Vision.
I won't tell you anything about the plot.
Direct from Matt, it's the Rolling Stone on Saturday night.
Hi, I'm Chevy Chase.
Chevy. Chevrolet.
Learn wetback English and evade the Border Patrol. Stalk the wild faggot in New York's Greenwich Village on the National Faggot Shoot.
So this year, say hi, Bawar, and tell them Leon sent you.
Western Union Marijuanagram.
Thanks, Bob.
This is Tunnel Vision.
I can show you a good time.
So come on in, Bill.
Bad news, drivers!
But there's hardly no milk, and fresh squeezed OJ, and whole wheat toast.
Rubbernecking and melon wrestling going on, so expect delays up to 3 hours. Meanwhile,
Hey, donut! But there's one left, and it's mine.
Springfield Arts and Crafts Festival on Beach Street, and there's a multiple fender bender outside the
Aw, Dad!
What we just seen is really what happened with Fox, the network, as Married with Children, The Simpsons, and these other shows came on and made Rupert Murdoch very wealthy. Money that he spent on developing Fox News. Fox News is so incredibly slanted and twisted and convoluted a news service I remember a time on Fox News when the war in Afghanistan was going on and the men at Guantanamo Bay had been secured. And there was an accident involving groups of people in Afghanistan. A Marine helicopter landed and there was firing. There was active aggression. And 2 of the Marines were killed trying to return back to their helicopter. This is a tragedy. This was war. The question of the day on Fox News is, should we kill 2 of the prisoners held in Guantanamo Bay? You can understand when some crazed, painful, heavy heart decides to do something like that. But when it's the news question of the day, the people that are there are so twisted and distorted, convoluted, so incredibly one-sided. As it took me 6 months to figure out that Fox News was not just a comedy. I really thought it was a comedy. I thought it was a Homer Simpson parody, till I found out that this was actual news. And now today, Rupert Murdoch has bought the Wall Street Journal. His incredible media power is bizarre.
We've lost the audio for this, but let me say, see here News Corp is taking over Wall Street Journal, Dow Jones and Company. It's a very, very expensive deal. This happened in 2008. Now, this entire movie is from 2008. I've updated it today in 2016. I just wanted you to really understand that at this point, Rupert Murdoch and his very, very large multimedia corporations, owning so much of Sky Television and The Simpsons and Fox Network and et cetera, that they are now taking over the Wall Street Journal. This is the 8th day of the 8th month of 2008. And basically, this is happening is now a small group of people, very, very rich, ultra-rich people, are now controlling the news media, controlling most of the things that we see and do, and the movies, and they control what goes into the minds of the masses.
The Bancrofts were offered so much money. They had raised the Wall Street Journal from its infancy and really weren't quite aware of what to really do with it. It has been a beacon of ethics and responsibility, but they were offered so much money, $5.6 billion. And they're concerned about its integrity, as they well should be, because now the world will have to go to Rupert Murdoch to get its news. Or does it have to? Does it have to? Will the internet keep alive? Will people like me be able to tell this story? Can I bring you too much truth? Can I bring you an idea? Can I expose the false belief that the news service is not telling you the truth? That's a false belief if you think that the news service is telling you the truth. There's a major problem here. It's a major, major problem.
And also in 2008, you see, the American government took over the ability to listen to all electronic communications. We showed this in our movie, The Echelon Conspiracy. You should watch that. But now they listen to all electronic communications, and they can even listen to your telephone, even when it's turned off.
What this story is about is that the United States Congress has awarded the president unfettered abilities and unfettered control to reach into every email, every bank statement, every bank transaction, everything that happens all over the world. 24 out of 25 people of the world do not live in America. We do not live in huts or caves. And America now has given the president the power to look into every email, every letter, every bit of phone conversation, every bank transaction. Unfettered control. Control that, when we look at it with the idea of the media and what the media can do, a complete unfettered control, a craziness that has happened. And here at Too Much Truth Television, this is the top story of the day, and this will continue to be the top story of every day, because this has incredible ramifications. When 9/11 happened, we're looking at cut of George Bush, what was happening. It's pretty easy to see that he didn't really know what was going on, or he's the best actor in the world. Having been a friend of his father and etc., and a supporter, I had dinner with President Bush Sr. and Vice President Quayle, and even Richard Nixon. I had breakfast with Richard Nixon. It's very interesting. And as a supporter, but then when his son ran, I thought he would be a good one. He would be able to continue. But his son is just a dim bulb, and he gets us into trouble, create big problems. And I think that there's some incredible obviousness that there is a problem here. Because when 9/11 happens, there's a lot of very interesting things. We can see from the movie 9/11, thanks to Michael Moore, the efforts that he had to put this together, that there really was something going on. I had seen a documentary that was made almost a year before 9/11, where they had inspected the towers and that the fire protection on the outer walls was completely substandard, was not done correctly, and the owners of the building were told that within less than 10 years, possibly 5, both buildings would be uninhabitable. They would need to be demolished. When the insurance people are asked, and they make an insurance policy just a couple months before, $3.5 billion insurance policy with a specific double indemnity clause requested if both buildings are hit by public transport in the same day. Awarding $7 billion. To 2 buildings that should have been demolished. 2,900 plus people died that day. As most of the Americans were told not to come, there was less than 600 Americans on that day. Mark Wahlberg was on David Letterman, and he told the story because David Letterman said, "Mark, you were supposed to be on that plane flying from down there." And Mark said, well, as he was walking, somebody came up to him and said, "Today's a good day to drive. Why don't you drive your car?" David Letterman said, "Say what?" He said he didn't want to talk about it. In light of these and other facts, the whole idea of the Pentagon and where did the engines go? The fact that an investigation is stopped and prohibited is insane. Absolutely insane. That we have a media and a culture and a society that would allow that. That we have slipped into the stupidity section. And we allowed that. That is off the charts. Something's wrong. When we look at 9/11 in the light of a prohibition of investigation, that kind of escapes us. There's a false belief here, actually quite a lot of them. But one of the big false beliefs is that the president should have that much power. No one man should have that much power. In today's world, to have unfettered control, unfettered power, to be able to just go into any country, drop an A-bomb. The point that we made more than any other in the movie, The War Crimes Trial of Harry S. Truman. No one man should have that kind of power. When they gave that power to the president in the beginning, they never envisioned that much power in the future. They couldn't have thought of that. Here we have 9/11. Here we have this incredible thing. What actually happens out of this? Did the terrorists win? Well, yes. Civil liberties are thrown away. 8,000 plus Arabs were put into concentration camps because of this, with the idea that possibly they might be involved. A loss of liberty. And I say 8,000 because they just stopped counting at that. There was obviously a lot more. The media has twisted this whole thing about Arabs. As you see that there's a responsibility of that media, and the media has twisted this and told us every day about the Arabs. It is not the Arab nation doing this. It's a couple of crazies. We don't even know for sure because no trial has absolutely happened. Yes, we have good, strong ideas, but we don't absolutely know. We have to have more clear thoughts about this because there's a great, incredible danger. Is it beyond belief that 9/11 was done and the twist against the Arabs was done to twist and twist and twist and twist until one person would have such control of the media and one person would have such control of every bank transaction, of every email, of every telephone call, that he would be able to know everything and control business and control the economy and make so much money? Is that not possible? And if you don't understand that it is possible, there's a problem. Not just possible, probable. It's probable. No investigation if the buzzers aren't going off. If you don't feel that your misbelief has been exploded. If you don't feel stupid right now, something wrong. Because it is not just possible, it is probable that somebody has been given so much unlimited power to control finances and control money. And we're looking at a near future where all of our freedoms could be thrown away in the light of power of economy. And somebody's going to make a stand about this. And the news media won't give it to you because they're under control. They've been told to look away from Desiree Dubonnet. I've worn a dress because this is the only way I'm safe. They think you won't listen. 70% of human communication is in the tone. Most of human communication comes across from the idea of the tone and the who and the where is it coming from. It seems to be so much more important. Our culture has gone this way. We have lost the ideas of communication into an idea of celebrity, as we're going to judge who the message comes from, where the message comes from. That's going to be more important than the message, as we have now gotten to the point of listening to the teacher and not the teachings. The first step of our process is learning to judge the teachings, not the teacher. It doesn't matter what I wear. Listen to these words. These are ideas. Don't spoon feed them. Think. Mull them around. Do you think that 9/11 could happen and somebody say no to an investigation? Think. Do you think that an insurance policy could be made a couple of months and a specific double indemnity clause be asked for? Think. Do you think that the media could be so horrendously controlled? Think. Do you think it's possible for the American people to give themselves complete control over the world? Think. This has all happened. We are at a crisis point. Today is 8/8. It's the anniversary of the Hiroshima bombings. We need to think. Don't just take the teachings. Don't just listen to the teacher. Think. Judge the teachings, not the teacher. Look for the message. Don't worry about the tone of the message. Somebody's standing on the tracks. The world is standing on the railroad tracks. Somebody's going to yell, "Get the fuck off!" And you say, I don't like the way you said that. What's wrong with you? Think. Tonight we have another top story of the news. Our top story tonight involves science. One of the things that's happened in our news in the world today is we've kind of made science a type of God. We see so many technological things, and we always think that they're at the end, and they seem to know, because they act like they know. Scientists have a real confidence of acting like they know, even when they don't, as they know so little. The atoms and electrons, that we can't even perceive these things. We've had to construct ideas that are always changing. As what we've found and what we thought we knew, we later find out we didn't really know. But yet scientists act like they know. We're talking about sports. Before I talk about sports, I'd like to tell you about the movie we did, Proof, because it was to show that there really is a non-local universe versus a local universe. We called it Proof because we gave it proof, beyond a shadow of doubt. And when somebody comes along and exposes your false belief, you want to shoot the messenger. And scientists are the most psychologically unstable people in the world. Not all, but many. And they get very, very unstable. So I want to tell a little bit about science. Here we have Linford Christie, one of the greatest runners of all time. Incredibly wonderful man, and the work that he did and his physical abilities as well. At the Seoul Olympics, he got down into the starting position to run the race of his life, his last chance at a gold medal. The gun went off. He started, but scientists said that his start was faster than any human could start. So they gave him a warning. The gun had gone off, and he started. But scientists had figured that nobody could start quicker than probably around 1/10 of a second. And they gave him a warning. Got down, did it again, got in position. The gun goes off, and he does it again. He is now disqualified and asked to leave the Olympics and not allowed to run at all. As the scientists have said, you can't react that fast. Isn't it the idea of the Olympics to constantly be better and better? And could not somebody have trained themselves to react faster? Yes, it is possible. That's why we have an Olympics. We don't set criteria. You can't do that. That's the whole idea of the Olympics. The gun went off. I don't know if that 20th of a second would have mattered, but it seemed to scientists. As we gave them the ability to take Linford Christie out of the games. We had another Olympic champion here, Andrea from Romania, you can see her picture here, as she won the all-around gold medal in gymnastics. Having performed at the world level in gymnastics, I can tell you how incredibly difficult that is. She had won the all-around competition. But in checking her urine, they had found that the doctor at the last minute had given her a small pill of a cold pill, a natural pill, vitamins, etc., that had a touch of mahung in it. Mahung is the herb which has ephedra in it in its natural form. This was one of the prohibited substances, and her gold medal was taken away. So it was taken away because scientists have said that that was an unfair advantage. Her little pill would be an unfair advantage to the other competitors. She had just worked for the last 6 years of her life washing dishes to pay for her coach and room and board, as that the country of Romania did not have the money. Maybe $6,000 a year was the proposed budget at that time per athlete. Yet in America, it was $6 million per year per athlete budgeted to buy the right food, and nutritionist, and housing, and etc., and sponsors, and that contributed to a lifestyle to be able to train, not have to wash dishes to make it. Next Olympics is coming up. What would be the unfair advantage? Would you, for your athlete, rather have that one pill? Or would you rather have that $6 million? The unfair advantage would be money. This story is not going to be told on the other news services because it would interfere with money. It would interfere with the flow of cash. They're not going to talk about drugs on that, even though the most powerful drug is money. You might see a small chastise of Rupert Murdoch, or maybe a couple people at a bar will get disgruntled because there's no investigation of 9/11. But it's our top news story. It's the news. It's the top news. And let's look elsewhere.
When we talk about business news, and we have to recognize that also news is a business and it makes money. And basically there have been a lot of bastardizations that have happened. In a court case, the judge ruled that Fox News and Monsanto behind them could lie. They could lie in the news. We call it tell-lie vision now. And basically this is not the way it's supposed to be. And if you keep telling a lie big enough and keep repeating it, people will believe it. Say neutral, television. The truth is whatever people will believe. CNN says that they will be truthful, not neutral. They're biased. They show their bias. All the different networks do this, and some do it in more extreme. Fox is one of the extreme examples of how they do this. They tell incredible stories. Hillary Clinton adopts an alien baby. Incredible stories in order to defend their evil, ultra-rich people, like Monsanto. You see, and you have to be crazy or stupid or lying to believe GMO foods are safe. And the ultra-rich control the media. And it is always profit over people with all of the different evil ultra-rich, big tobacco, big pharma, big sugar, controlling what the corporate news are doing or writing. They control the money strings. And as sponsors, they are telling stories that can't be told. It is found that PBS is the only one that people saw as unbiased because it has no real sponsors. The sponsors, it gets in public money. So PBS was seen as the least biased of all of them. And then, of course, Donald Trump wants to end PBS. Wants to end the unbiased reports. And see, the rich get richer, poor get poorer, dumb get dumber. Big sugar kills millions, billions. Big tobacco addicts kids. Big pharma controls the FDA. The ultra-rich plan on killing people. Two-party system's a joke. And they sell weapons to both sides. These are the real stories.
Here's another type of false belief that's propagated. In my little story about the left hand, right hand, big head, little head, 7 to 10% of the people of the world are born left-handed. It simply happens. Every child's born left-handed, and then within the next year or so, a preference is designed. A preference choice is made as to which hand will be preferred, which foot, etc. Most of the people of the planet would choose the right hand. However, some people would choose the left hand. The choice of this takes place in the brain. It does not take place in the hand. For thousands of years, there was persecution and prosecution of these people who were left-handed, as they were different. They were different than the rest of the people. So they were hurt, prosecuted, made fun of, and many times killed. They were different. People have an instinct to not really like difference, even though we are so different. Human beings are wildly, wildly different. 7 to 10% of the people of the world are born with a type of variation in sexual preference. A man might prefer to have sex with a man rather than a woman. A man might feel more of a woman, like me. A man might feel he's more of a woman. It's a choice, it's a preference. This happens. A woman might decide that she'd rather have sex with a woman than with a man. The choice of sexuality does not take place in the little head. The choice of sexuality takes place in the big head. Clear, evident. But yet in many countries, including the United States, they feel that the choice is in the little head, and that if a man wanted to become a woman, he would have to remove it. That's not the case. Spain is the one country of the world now that has decided that if a person past the age of 21 can live as the opposite sex for a year, they can change their driver's license, their identity. It is not a little head choice, it is a big head choice. We all know what kind of problems happen when you start making decisions on the little head. And yet we have entire countries that make their decisions on the little head. And yet we all know what kind of problems that happen when you make decisions on the little head. And yet today we have countries, whole countries, that make their decisions on the little head. This is a problem. In the old days of Rome and Greece, there was a freedom of choice of sexuality, a freedom of choice of gender, as that was really a big head choice. If a woman decided to live her life as a man, she could. If a man decided to live as a woman, it was kind of free. There was not the type of stipulations. Most of the stipulations come in our Victorian culture that came out of some of the Dark Ages and developed. But it's actually a big head decision. What I've just done is expose a false belief. For some people, it's not a problem and they can handle it. But for others, there could be a problem. You see, 7 to 10% of the people of the planet have cross-gender, but less than 2% express it. Leaving 5 to 8%, or maybe more, who repress it and push it under and push it down. So you see, these people will have a problem with that little story. It will antagonize them. They will seek to hurt people. They'll be so annoyed by that story that they want to do something. Project What Are You Afraid Of simply says, well, what are you afraid of if you're homophobic? If you're afraid of homosexuals, what are you afraid of? I was hired to work with a group of homophobics who had hurt people. As a licensed psychologist, I was able to do this here in Budapest. And they asked me to work with these people to try to help them. As I worked with these people, I first off said that homosexuality now in Europe is an accepted way of life. It is an accepted way of life that people can, and is protected, and they are protected against discrimination. Homophobia, however, is an irrational fear. An irrational fear is defined as a disease if you don't really know what you're afraid of. Because really, what are you afraid of? As I said to the men, if a crazed lunatic band of wild, crazy, insane homosexuals came into your village when you were 6 years old and burned it to the ground and raped your father, if you tell me that, I will let you leave. You would have a reason to be afraid. Chances are they came into your village and redecorated. I don't think you have reason to be afraid. If it's an irrational fear, if you don't really know why you're afraid, then that's where the problem comes in. Now we explain what you really are afraid of. Because if you have that feeling inside, you would be afraid of humiliation. So you'd be afraid of humiliation. You would be afraid that if you don't react to the homosexual, that your friends will think you are. So there was a problem in Moscow this year. There was blood as the homophobics, the latent homosexuals, the homophobics, as they attacked a group of homosexuals who were trying to have some type of demonstration. It then happened again here in my city, Budapest. As it happened again, as there was a gay pride parade about a month ago. And there it was. People jumped out, threw eggs, tomatoes, hit people. There was blood in the streets. Just the last couple of days, I had Mr. Gay Europe here, 2007. I put up this sign. This sign that says, in Hungarian, only a latent homosexual or a coward would throw an egg or do violence. Nobody else would really be bothered. Nobody else would do this. We put up this sign, and for our 4-day conference, nothing happened. There was no violence. There was not one thing thrown. A group of men were seen who brought eggs, as that there was a letter circulated around the city asking people to come throw eggs at me. When they came, they read that sign, and they walked away angry, but they didn't want to throw an egg. That's one of their friends would now know that the only person who does violence, the only person who cannot deal, the only person who gets angry at homosexuals, excessive overreaction of homophobia, is designed to cover up. He's trying to convince himself and to convince his friend that he's not homosexual. That's why he does it. But now we know different. It's a sign of sexual insecurity. And what I've just done is exposed a false belief. A lot of people don't want to accept that. A lot of people will want still to insist on surgery. A friend of mine lost his dick in Vietnam as it was shot off. And there were ignorant people who thought that he was no longer a man. He was a very strong man, got married, had kids, had a wonderful life. Only an ignorant, unintelligent boob would think that his masculinity was only contained in his little head. Truth is, sexuality is a big head choice, is that all of our choices in life are big head choices. And that false belief is now gone. That's our top news story of the day. Top story of the day, another one. The idea about weapons, the idea about responsibility for those weapons. We've seen an incredible escalation about these different types of weapons that have been sold around the world. 1989, when the Iron Curtain came down, there was an explosion of old weapons from the Soviet countries that just exploded onto the scene of the world and were sold. We've seen this in movies like The Lord of War, where we have a little cut from it. We'll cut to it now. What we've just seen is basically true. It's a true story of a man who just sells weapons and sells them all over the world, and little kids are killing each other. Very strange. Now, we have a cut here from the trials of Nuremberg. This is from the movie The Judgment of Nuremberg. And we're going to see a little bit about this with weapons as we watch Spencer Tracy in an incredible acting performance. We're going to cut to that now.
opening address to the French prosecutor before the International Military Tribunal. It is obvious that in a state organized along modern lines, responsibility is confined to those who act directly for the state. Since they alone are in a position to judge the legitimacy of the given orders, they alone can be prosecuted. I have another from Professor Yarri's legal aspects.
What he's just said is that according to the treatises of the law, prior to this trial, only the people who were involved with the acts of the state were to be responsible. In this trial now, he has different judges who are really not members of the state, but judges that contributed, and they're on trial. Let's hear what Spencer Tracy has to say now.
Really clear-cut case against the defense pertaining to the charges in the indictment. Regardless of the acts committed, we cannot make the interpretations that these defendants are really responsible for crimes against humanity. What do you think?
He makes a point. He makes a point that these people are not really responsible. And legally, he's right. But yet there was such tragedy that had been committed. Something needed to be done. All of this was commissioned by Harry S. Truman, who dropped atomic weapons on human beings. And by the way, today is the anniversary, as today is August the 8th, the anniversary of the bombing of Hiroshima. It's a good thing we're watching this.
You know, Curtis, when I first became a judge, I knew there were certain people in town I wasn't supposed to touch. I knew that if I was to remain a judge, this was so. But how in God's name do you expect me to look the other way at the murder of 6 million people?
Did I hear him just admit that he had, that justice where he was could be curved, that there was people in town that he was not to touch? Did he just admit to curving justice because of special people?
You know, Curtis, when I first became a judge, I knew there were certain people in town I wasn't supposed to touch. I knew that if I was to remain a judge, this was so. But how in God's name do you expect me to look the other way at the murder of 6 million people?
And that if he was to remain a judge, he had to give special attention. Is that what he just said? That's what he just said. Yeah. Let's go on.
But how in God's name do you...
Oh, I'm sure he didn't. I'm not asking you to look the other way at them.
Curtis, you were saying that the men are not responsible for their acts. You're going to have to explain that to me. You're going to have to explain it very carefully.
Captain Kirk ought to know. There he is. Look at that. Incredible.
The principle of criminal law in every civilized society has this in common.
Here we get to the important part. The principle of criminal law.
Any person who sways another to commit murder, any person who furnishes the lethal weapon for the purpose of the crime, any person who is an accessory to the crime is guilty.
Any person who furnishes the lethal weapon of the crime. Very idea of how the laws of our world and our legal system are made, the principle of criminal law.
He and all of the other defendants had been degraded perverts, if all of the leaders of the Third Reich had been sadistic monsters and maniacs, then these events would have no more moral significance than an earthquake.
But the media sells fear, and they implant fear to make wars and to drive people into horrendous things, producing all kinds of problems.
That under a national crisis, ordinary, even able and extraordinary men can delude themselves into the commission of crimes so vast and heinous that they beggar the imagination.
Who is an accessory to the crime is guilty.
The incredible amount of weapons that have been sold into the Mideast. Today's news story was that over 200,000 weapons, aka machine guns and rifles, are missing in Iraq. American weapons missing, gone from their boxes. It's amazing. And here we can see just the news from a couple of days ago. Let's watch.
With Egypt and Saudi Arabia on a multi-billion-dollar arms deal, the US Secretary of State is heading to Israel and the West Bank. Israel gets the lion's share in the arms deal. Fuji Schubert is in Jerusalem, where Wright is also expected to kickstart those peace talks. Atika.
That's right. Israel is getting a substantial bump up in the military aid that it gets from Israel. 25% increase, in fact, bringing it to a total of $30 billion over the next decade. But there are still many critics in Israel about this U.S. arms deal, in particular the fact that a substantial amount of money is going to Saudi Arabia.
Here we have that $20 billion going to Saudi Arabia in arms and $15 billion going to Israel. And the report, $30 billion going to Israel. $30 billion going to Israel. And $20 billion going to Saudi Arabia. As we've seen in the basic premise of law, that the man who supplies the weapons is responsible. The major weapons manufacturers of the world have washed that away. They have washed away that belief. It is tragic, the amount of deaths that have happened from weapons in the last 10 years. The news story are not covering this in its true form, not telling about the idea of basic law. They're not telling us everything. Money and power are more effective. A couple of news people will rant and rave and nobody cares. Nobody really cares. You're not told the real truth. This is just a story. And yet, some of your friends will die from those weapons. If we didn't have those weapons, those people wouldn't die.
10 years, and many critics here are fearful that it might tip the balance of power in the region. Israel, of course, has been for some time now the top military power, but there are also fears that this sort of sophisticated weapons technology could end up in the hands of terrorists. A lot of critics here point out that Al-Qaeda ideology, the source of it has been Saudi Arabia. And so there are a lot of critics here. It's something that is likely to be discussed when Rice comes this afternoon to meet with Israeli officials, Sasha.
So indeed, that those concerns that must be that those arms are going to go to groups that they wouldn't actually be supporting, that those arms aren't intended to go to, possibly organisations like Hamas. Is that right?
There are concerns about this. Of course, what's interesting is that this plan is designed, this arms deal is designed to counter the influence of Iran, and this is something Israel is very concerned about. Groups like Hamas, Hezbollah, these are groups that Israel believes are backed by Iran. But at the same time, it finds itself confronting the fact that these new sophisticated technology being transferred to.
Okay, Atika, thank you very much. Well, these weapons from the donor country, in this case, the US, here's more now on arms sales worldwide. Last year, global military spending totaled $1.2 trillion, a post-Cold War record, and growing military budgets mean more money is used to buy weapons. Well, just 5 years ago, international arms transfers were at their lowest level in 4 decades. But that figure has been rising every year since, to around $27 billion in 2006. Well, the majority of weapons exported around the world each year come from just 2 countries. The United States accounts for 30% of weapons exports, mostly to the Middle East, the Asia Pacific, and to Europe. Close behind is Russia. Its weapons go mainly to China and to India, and increasingly to other countries the United States won't deal with, like Venezuela.
Now, these weapons are not free and they cost money. And that financial need to use those weapons before they become obsolete also creates the tension that people don't want to waste their money. It was very unusual when I was here living in Budapest and there was the Balkan War. And there was a war 200 miles from my door. I could drive a car down to Yugoslavia and there was a war. The United States was bombing Slobodan Milosevic and his people. They were trying to supposedly end a conflict. And it was very interesting as I was watching CNN one day. I did not get a chance to record it, but I wish I would have, because it was very interesting. This was the year 1999, and just coming up was the Y2K problem. What was going to happen to computers with the Y2K? The big scare that everybody had, didn't know what was going to happen. They interviewed a whole bunch of people, and especially the government, in this article, it was on CNN, news article. And they finally got down to, there was one real problem that could be avoided. They said in the military there was 8,000 smart bombs. 8,000 smart bombs that would be undeniably, absolutely, totally obsolete, useless in the year 2000. Everything else they kind of thought would be no problem. They didn't think there would be any real other problems. But there would be 8,000 smart bombs, useless. This report was compiled about 4 months before the end of the year, and this was in December 1999. The next article came on was the today's news of that day, 1999, and the news was an update on the bombing of the Balkans. As they said that up to date now, 7,500 smart bombs had been dropped on Slobodan Milosevic and his people, and that some of those smart bombs had actually hit the Chinese embassy and killed people who were innocent. You see, there was a need to get rid of those bombs because they were going to be obsolete. That's the condition we have today, and what we've seen is a basic principle of law. The man who sells the weapons is responsible as well. I don't think we're going to hear that story, are we, on the news? Too Much Truth television has to bring you that story. And this is the top story of the evening. This is the top story of the day. This is the top story of the fucking decade until this changes. This is the top story, as we have many, many top stories. Tonight's top news story, top news story, about the guns in America. 75 children a week are dying from guns as an average from America. They thought it was around 20, but when they actually got into the deaths that reported on the death certificates, they found that there was a lot of deaths that were hidden and covered up. But you can't cover it up from the coroner, see? Coroner knows. So the death certificates were the ultimate judge. And that's when they found it was 75 children a week. A horrific statement. And there's a movie made, Bowling for Columbine, about the killing of the guns. I lived in Littleton, Colorado, and my stepchild, I had to take her to school every day, to that little school at Columbine. I drove her there in the morning and picked her up most of the evenings. I was at some of the dances. I was actually a chaperone, and I knew the kids that had done the shooting. It was right before that shooting that I had moved to Budapest, and I was horrified to see what had happened. I wrote a letter to Michael Moore after that movie, explaining that I knew the answer. So I knew the answer to his question. He asked why. Why America? Why so many children dying from guns? And I wrote him a letter saying, listen, I'm going to give you a one-word answer. And you're going to research into this one-word answer. You're going to find out it's true. You're going to find out that there's something here. And it's going to eat at you. And you're going to want to do your next movie about this. This was just about the time we had finished the 9/11 movie. And I told them that one-word answer is Prozac. You see, all these mass murderers, etc., are involved with Prozac. As it's the Prozac that makes them crazy. That's what really does it. Inside the synaptic cleft, inside the body, we have many different types of neurotransmitters. And one of them is serotonin. And serotonin is a happy hormone that hits its spot and produces a little euphoria. The effect of one glass of alcohol is to release serotonin in the body. This is why you get that slight euphoria, you feel good. After that, no more serotonin is released. But you get fuzzier, then you get drunk. But that first feeling of euphoria, that little dropping of the inhibitions, comes from that serotonin release. The drug companies thought that if they could block the reuptake of serotonin, because once this serotonin's like a key and it goes over and triggers the happy spot, that if they could block the reabsorption of that key back to where it belonged, they could keep the key in the synaptic cleft longer to turn the lock. However, as in all biology, that reabsorption of the serotonin has a biological function. That biological function is a function of a reality check, an ability to check the reality. As you might drink, and as people do, but you wake up in the morning and find out your troubles are back. It's reality check time. You still have a gas bill. We talk about going to the bar and there'd be a girl on your arm and she's so ugly and you'd want to chew your arm off rather than wake her up. We call it the coyote date. Reality check time. Last night she was beautiful. Today she's, uh-oh. Prozac blocks that reality check. This is why it's associated with these different conditions. Recently, we had the Virginia Tech shootings. Just as the shootings were done, I wrote this letter in its first form. 2 days later, we found out that yes, indeed, that man was also on a Prozac-type formula. Because it stops your ability to be able to judge what is right and wrong. So the man in Montreal who was taking it thought there was too many women in his mechanical engineering class. You see, when you have normal reality check abilities, you can understand that that's not appropriate behavior to go and kill all the women in your mechanical engineering class. And if you have friends as a feedback loop and you discuss that idea, they're going to tell you, no, that's kind of stupid to do that. But if you don't have any friends, you don't have any feedback, you see, then what do you do? Where do you go? Because now that's what happens with the Prozac and the Prozac user, especially if he has no friends. I wrote this letter to all the major news services. I've written lots of letters on lots of different things. And they all get published except this letter. Because basically what I'd said is that in a type of proof, it's a pharmacological event. You You see, as the one policeman at the scene remarks how the man who did the Virginia Tech shooting is so calm and cool, and he does not sweat as he reloads. He doesn't shake. Sweat is describing, lack of sweat is describing a pharmacological event. The man said, he was a policeman, and the man said if he had to, in a state of war, do this, he would sweat, he would shake. But it's amazing how these people don't do it, because this is what happens with the Prozac. It blocks this. Even if this is just opinion, as I believe it to be very, very true, but even if it was just opinion, that letter should be published. But that letter in any of its forms will not be published, because the media don't want to in any way interfere with their largest main funding source, the funding source of the drug companies, as it is in everybody's portfolio and controls so much of Hollywood music. And why, with all the music that I do and all the movies that I make, the reason that nobody ever gets a chance to watch any of them or listen. And you're watching now Too Much Truth. You're watching the top stories of the day. This is the top story of the day. Children are dying. And people have said in the news, as I've talked with news people, and they said, we can't cover all the deaths of children by guns. There would be no other news. It's news. And if there's a possibility, even the slightest idea of a cure or an exploration that could help this, it needs to be done. There are parents, there are people being affected. The news people are bastardized and bought out. Everything has been slightly twisted. Everything is askew. Everything is spinned. And the big money people will not be touched. That's why today, the top news story of the day, there are children dying of guns. We will cover it. The other news services will not. We will show you this letter. The other news services will not. They are protecting people. They are protecting big money, oil, pharmaceuticals, petrochemicals. They are protecting these big people.
Breaking news, this just in. Breaking news, we just came across our news desk. We find out that the people will believe whatever the media tells them. That's a quote from George Orwell. And that Desiree Duvernay, me, I'm trying to help cut those strings. You can join us. There will be 100 million angels trying to cut the strings and trying to bring truth. You see, we try to bring opinions, we try to bring speculation, and we try to expose different types of truth. And we do this at IMFlix, Intellectual Angel Movies, to try to bring to you stories that Hollywood can't tell, that offend the sponsors of the evil ultra-rich, and to help to educate you as to what might really be what you need to know in today's world.